I think even after just the first day of this conference, we've really seen the richness of knowledge that exists on how to implement nutrition-sensitive agriculture approaches in rural areas, as well as some of their impacts. What we know a lot less about, however, is how, or even whether, to implement such approaches in urban areas, as well as the sustainability of such approaches over the long term. So this presentation is going to attempt to do a little tiny bit to try to fill those knowledge gaps. The project in question was funded by Global Affairs Canada and implemented in Guédioué, a neighborhood of Dakar, Senegal. As you can see from the pictures, it's a crowded place. People don't have much space. They have even less access to land. Incomes are low, access to employment is limited, and indicators for malnutrition are generally worse than for urban Senegal as a whole. So this project sought to address that by piloting an approach to improving the nutrition of children and women of reproductive age through agriculture in an urban context. The main participants were women with young children, and there were three main interventions. First, each woman received 2 compact micro-garden tables, as shown in the picture at the bottom left, as well as training on how to use those to produce nutrient-rich vegetables, and starter inputs such as seeds to begin doing so. Second, each woman received a compact 2-level hen house that could be used to raise chickens with very limited space, as shown in the bottom middle photograph, as well as a rooster and 3 laying hens, and again, one-to-one training on how to raise those birds to be able to produce eggs. Finally, all participants were targeted with behavior change communication on nutrition and health topics, with a key emphasis on consuming the items that were produced using the tables and hen houses to improve women's and children's nutrition. Now, the project theory of change really focused on this consumption to improve nutrition pathway because we understood that with small levels of production, it wouldn't be very feasible probably to have sales and increase people's incomes. We focused primarily on improving consumption. Now, the project ended in March 2016, and 18 months later, we went back to see what was left, basically. Our metrics of sustainability focused primarily on practices. Did people keep the hen house and the table? Did they maintain it? And did they continue to use it to grow vegetables and to produce eggs? We also looked some at the use of these products for consumption or sale to generate income. The methods were primarily based on a survey of a random sample of 20% of former participants, as well as 20 in-depth interviews with people who had been particularly successful at continuing their production. And we knew that one of the challenges with this kind of research was that there would be a high potential bias in responses, that people were very likely to say, oh yes, of course I kept the table, I use it every day, even if they got rid of it months ago. As such, we required enumerators to not only observe the existence of the table in the hen house, but to take photographs of it. We thus used the photographs and analyzed those in combination with the questionnaire data to classify households into their status of continuation. So, turning to the results. For the micro-garden tables, the results in a word were disappointing. We went back, we found that 18 months after the end of the project, 72% of former participants no longer even had the tables in their households. And an additional 18% had them, but they were in poor condition. Indeed, only 5% were actively using the tables to grow nutrient-rich crops at the time of the survey. An additional 17% claimed that they'd done so in the past 6 months, so our continuation rate was anywhere from 5 to 22%. In addition, the quantities that were harvested were generally fairly small. Participants said that they were important to them, but very much a secondary source of household vegetable consumption. And sales were extremely rare, with median earnings of just about $8 within the past 6 months. When we turned to the hen houses, however, we saw a completely different situation. 78% of former participants still had the hen house and had maintained it in good condition. 50% were actively using it to raise chickens at the time of the survey. An additional 25% had done so within the past 6 months. So we had a continuation rate of between 50 and 75%. In addition, 20% of households had more chickens than they had had at the end of the project, and the average flock size grew significantly to almost 6 chickens, as opposed to just over 4 at the end of the project. And one interesting thing that we found when we went back was that people had tended to shift away from the laying hens that were promoted during the project towards raising broilers for meat production. And this had some implications for the potential nutrition impacts of the project. We saw that egg production generally fell, both in terms of the percentage of households that were producing eggs and in terms of the numbers of eggs that were produced. In contrast, sales of chicken rose markedly, as did the median revenues earned from this. Median revenues for the past 4 months during the sustainability study were about $40 per person, and we had a handful of participants who had earned over $100 in the prior 4 months. To put that in context, it might not sound like a lot, but given the income earning opportunities that are available to women within this context and the type of wages they would have access to, this is actually quite a lot of money. So why? Why did we see such a divergence in sustainability for these two interventions? Interestingly, when we talked to people about the reasons why they discontinued using the hen house or the table, the reasons were almost identical. Everybody cited a lack of space. These things took up way too much space in the small houses that they had, and that they were hard to maintain. They'd fallen into disrepair and were no longer usable. In contrast, the reasons that people had for continuing were very different. For the people who continued using the tables to grow vegetables, they cited primarily a passion, a personal interest. They really enjoyed gardening. They liked seeing crops come out of the soil. They also found that the gardens could play a social role within their neighborhoods because they could give the vegetables they produced, or particularly mint to use in flavoring tea, to their neighbors as gifts, and this created a social network for them within the neighborhoods. For the hen houses, in contrast, people primarily cited the ability to earn income, and particularly to earn income that they could use independent of their husbands. They also appreciated the possibility of regularly being able to eat chicken and eggs, which were foods they thought of as treats in the home. But across both the hen houses and the tables, an ability to adapt the techniques and to change a bit beyond what had been promoted by the project really facilitated the continuation of the practices in the long term. So, turning to what are some broader implications of this research. First of all, I think it serves as a reminder to all of us that we really need to understand the market and food system in which participants are embedded when we're designing projects. When we designed this project, we were coming from such projects in rural areas, and we made the assumption that a fairly small level of production meant that the income to improve nutrition pathway wouldn't be a very feasible one to focus on. The sustainability research and our former project participants showed that we were wrong. Because participants were so closely linked to input and output markets for chickens, as well as to complementary services, it was actually a very feasible way for them to make some money. But second, if we want to focus more on that income to consumption pathway, while ensuring that the project remains nutrition sensitive, we need a revised approach to behavior change communication. We need to focus not only on promoting the consumption of one's production, but on educating people on what are the best choices they can make for their newly generated income to improve nutrition and health. Finally, just a word on the usefulness of sustainability research. We continue what we value, and thus, by looking at what people choose to continue after a project has ended and its incentives are gone, we get useful insights on people's preferences and motivations without some of the biases that we might see before or during a project. As such, sustainability research can be very useful not only for telling us more about the long-term effectiveness of our projects, but for telling us about what people really want and how we can be better at delivering on that. Thank you all for listening, and I'll also thank all my collaborators.